the untold story of an infertile woman and her despising mother-in-law. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button so you don't miss more incredible stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's dive in. The air was thick with the scent of fresh roses and jasmine garlands, their delicate petals adorning the grand hall where the wedding was taking place. Guests chattered excitedly, the clinking of glasses and the laughter of children filling the space with life. It was a celebration, one that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in Amina's life. Dressed in a deep red bridal lehenga embroidered with golden threads, Amina sat with her hands delicately folded, her heart pounding beneath the heavy fabric. Tonight, she was marrying Idris, a man she had only met once, but had heard nothing but good things about. Idris was known in their town as a man of integrity, respected by both elders and peers alike. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with eyes that carried the wisdom of someone far beyond his years, he exuded a quiet confidence. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, his voice was steady, reassuring. Amina had been told he was a devoted son, a hard-working man, and above all, someone who feared God. That last part was what truly mattered to her. As a devout Muslim, Amina had spent her life in quiet devotion. From the moment she was old enough to understand the significance of prayer, she never missed a single salah. Her mornings began with the soft glow of dawn filtering through the small window of her room, the Quran resting in her lap as she recited its verses with unwavering dedication. Even during the busiest of days, she always found time to memorize a new surah, committing each word to heart like a sacred promise between her and her Creator. Her father had always been proud of her devotion. "Amina," he would say, his voice filled with warmth, "a woman who walks with faith will never walk alone." Those words had carried her through difficult times, had strengthened her when the world seemed too harsh. And now, as she stepped into this new life, she clung to them, believing that with faith, she would find happiness. The wedding concluded with joyous ululations from the women, and soon, Amina found herself seated in a car beside Idris, her hands trembling slightly as they drove toward what would now be her new home. The city lights flickered past the window, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Would she be able to maintain her daily prayers? Would she still have time to sit in quiet contemplation with the Quran? Would Idris support her devotion, or would marriage change everything? Upon arriving at her new home, she was met with a sea of unfamiliar faces. Idris's family was large, and at the center of it all was his mother, Tahira. A woman of strong will and sharp eyes, Tahira carried herself like a queen, her posture rigid, her expressions unreadable. Amina lowered her gaze respectfully as she greeted her new mother-in-law, but instead of the warmth she had hoped for, she received a mere nod, an appraising glance that sent a chill down her spine. The first few days passed in a blur of introductions and new routines. Amina quickly learned that the household was run on a strict schedule, one dictated by Tahira. From the moment the sun rose, there were tasks to complete, meals to prepare, and chores to be done. Amina had never shied away from responsibility, but she soon realized that time, something she had once dedicated so freely to prayer and recitation, was no longer hers to control. One morning, as the faint call to prayer echoed in the distance, Amina slipped out of bed, her heart longing for the serenity of Fajr. She moved quietly, hoping not to disturb anyone, but as she finished her prayer and reached for her Quran, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Amina, come to the kitchen," Tahira commanded from the doorway. "It's time to prepare breakfast." Amina blinked, momentarily frozen. "I will be there shortly, Amma," she responded, quickly closing the Quran. Tahira's eyes narrowed. "There is no shortly in this house. You are a wife now. Your duties come first." Her words stung more than Amina cared to admit. She wanted to argue, to explain that her devotion to God was not something she could simply cast aside, but she bit her tongue, reminding herself that patience was a virtue. With a heavy heart, she set the Quran down and made her way to the kitchen, her footsteps feeling heavier than before. Days turned into weeks, and Amina found herself caught in an endless cycle of domestic responsibilities. She tried to steal moments for prayer, tried to find slivers of time to whisper her du'as, but it was never enough. The Quran, once a constant companion, now lay untouched on a high shelf, gathering dust. She felt its absence like an ache in her chest. Idris noticed the change in her. One night, as they lay side by side, he turned to her, his voice gentle. "You seem different, Amina. Are you unhappy?" She hesitated before answering, afraid of burdening him. "I miss my prayers," she admitted softly. "I miss my time with the Quran." Idris sighed, reaching for her hand. "I know my mother can be demanding, but please be patient. Things will get better. I promise." His words were meant to comfort her, but they only deepened her sorrow. How long would she have to wait? How much would she have to sacrifice? Amina wanted to believe that her faith would guide her through this, but as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the fear that she was slowly losing herself. And so, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what, she would not let this house, this life, strip her of who she was. She would find a way to balance it all, to be a good wife, a dutiful daughter-in-law, but also a woman of faith. Because Amina knew one thing for certain: a woman who walks with faith never walks alone. The sun filtered through the delicate lace curtains of Amina's bedroom, casting golden patterns across the modest furnishings. Despite the warmth of the morning light, her heart felt cold, weighed down by a sorrow that no amount of sunlight could chase away. It had been 2 years since she and Idris were married, 2 years of whispered prayers and hopeful anticipation. Yet her womb remained empty, and with each passing day, the burden of expectations grew heavier. Tahira's gaze bore into Amina like a silent accusation, her sharp eyes constantly watching, waiting. The house, once merely demanding, now felt suffocating. Every meal she prepared, every chore she completed, seemed insignificant under the ever-growing shadow of her inability to conceive. Amina had always known the value placed on motherhood, but she hadn't expected the silent condemnation that followed when it didn't happen right away. She often heard hushed conversations from the other women in the family. "Perhaps she's not strong enough," one aunt whispered. "Maybe something is wrong with her." Another speculated. Amina clenched her fists whenever she heard those words. But what hurt the most was the absence of any defense from Tahira. If anything, her mother-in-law's silence was an unspoken agreement. Idris, though loving and kind, felt the weight as well. Amina saw it in the way his shoulders tensed when neighbors inquired about children. She noticed how he avoided discussions of fatherhood, how his smiles became forced when his younger cousins paraded their newborns before him. He never spoke an unkind word to her, but the sadness in his eyes was undeniable. One evening, after yet another tense family gathering where the topic of children had surfaced yet again, Amina sat beside Idris on their bed, fingers tracing the embroidered patterns of the blanket. "Do you ever regret marrying me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Idris turned to her, his brows furrowing. "Amina, how can you ask me that?" She swallowed, eyes stinging. "Because I see it in their eyes. I hear it in their voices. They think I'm failing you." He reached for her hands, his touch warm and grounding. "You have never failed me," he said firmly. "We are in this together, and if Allah wills it, we will have a child. If not, then we will still have each other. That is enough for me." His words comforted her, but they didn't silence the ache in her heart. That night, she prayed harder than ever, kneeling on the prayer mat with tears streaming down her face, whispering fervent supplications into the silence of the room. Months later, when the first signs of pregnancy appeared, an unusual fatigue, a wave of nausea, Amina hardly dared to believe it. She waited, held her breath, and when the doctor confirmed it, she wept into Idris's chest, overwhelmed with relief. They were going to be parents. The weight she had carried for so long finally began to lift. The household changed overnight. Tahira, once cold and distant, suddenly regarded Amina with a newfound warmth. "Finally," she muttered, though there was a begrudging edge to her tone. "You must be careful. This child must be a boy. You must do everything to ensure it." Amina nodded but found herself uneasy. How could she ensure something beyond her control? Still, she held on to her happiness, even as she felt the pressure settle over her like an unseen shroud. As her pregnancy progressed, she began to glow with an inner light. Idris became more attentive than ever, ensuring she was well-fed, well-rested, and cared for. The household, too, seemed to buzz with excitement. Then, 5 months in, the complications began. Amina felt an unnatural fatigue, a persistent dizziness that never quite left her. Then came the sharp pains, so sudden and intense that they took her breath away. Idris rushed her to the hospital, his hands shaking as he helped her inside. The doctor's face was grave as he delivered the news. "I'm sorry," he said gently, "but you've lost the babies." The words hit like a physical blow. Amina gasped, clutching her stomach as though she could hold on to them, as though sheer will could bring them back. Idris's arms wrapped around her, but she barely registered his presence. Everything felt distant, muted, as if the world had blurred into a dull, meaningless hum. The next few days were a haze. Tahira's sorrow was overshadowed by frustration. "What did you do?" she demanded one evening. "How could you let this happen?" Amina, still raw from the loss, stared at her in disbelief. "I didn't let anything happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. Tahira scoffed. "Women stronger than you have carried twins. Maybe you weren't meant to be a mother." The cruelty of those words would stay with Amina for a long time. Idris intervened, standing protectively in front of his wife. "Enough, mother," he said, his voice hard. "Amina needs time to heal. We have all suffered a loss today." But for Amina, healing felt impossible. Nights were the hardest, each silent moment a reminder of what had been taken from her. She dreamed of tiny hands grasping her fingers, of lullabies whispered into the quiet night. And each morning she woke to an empty ache in her chest. She knew she had to find strength. If not for herself, then for Idris, for the possibility of a future where hope still existed. And so she wiped her tears, straightened her spine, and whispered a prayer into the darkness. She would endure. The seasons changed, and with them, Amina's silent prayers grew stronger. The loss of her twins had left a scar deep in her heart, but she refused to let despair define her. For 2 more years she endured the whispers, the gentle glances from relatives, and the heavy burden of unfulfilled expectations. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her faith unshaken, though at times the loneliness felt unbearable. Then, on a cold morning in early December, everything changed. Amina sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers gripping the delicate fabric of her shawl. A strange dizziness had settled over her for weeks, accompanied by an exhaustion that no amount of rest could cure. Her heart pounded as she watched the doctor scribble something onto a sheet of paper before turning to face her and Idris. "Congratulations," the doctor said with a warm smile. "You're pregnant." For a moment, Amina couldn't breathe. The room seemed to shrink around her, her vision blurring as tears welled in her eyes. Idris reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly, his own eyes shining with emotion. "Alhamdulillah," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "Alhamdulillah." The news spread through the household like wildfire. Women bustled about, preparing special dishes, offering prayers of gratitude. Even Tahira, whose sharp words had once cut Amina to the core, seemed momentarily softened. This time, she declared, "It must be a boy." Amina smiled, but inside, she knew she had no control over such things. All she could do was pray for a healthy child, for a life untouched by the cruelty she had endured. Months passed, and with each day her belly swelled, carrying the promise of new life. Idris was more attentive than ever, ensuring she ate well, rested enough, and was shielded from stress. But Tahira remained fixated on the baby's gender. She insisted on accompanying them to the doctor's appointment when the time came for the ultrasound. As Amina lay on the examination table, the cool gel spread across her stomach. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. The doctor studied the screen, then smiled. "Alhamdulillah, the baby is healthy." Tahira leaned forward, her fingers gripping the edge of her shawl. "And?" she pressed. "Is it a boy?" The doctor's smile didn't falter. "It's a girl." Amina's heart swelled with joy, but beside her, Tahira stiffened. The warmth that had briefly touched her mother-in-law's face vanished, replaced by something cold, unreadable. "A girl," she murmured, her voice flat. "Just one?" "Yes," the doctor confirmed. "A healthy baby girl." Tahira exhaled sharply. Without another word, she stood and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. That evening, the house felt heavier. Tahira's disappointment was palpable, hanging in the air like an unspoken accusation. When they returned home, she barely acknowledged Amina. "I wasted my entire day for this," Tahira muttered under her breath. "A girl." Amina bit her lip, her hands instinctively resting over her belly. She wanted to protest, to tell Tahira that this child, this precious life, was a blessing. But she knew her words would fall on deaf ears. Instead, she turned to Idris, hoping for reassurance. "She's our daughter," Idris said firmly, standing by Amina's side, "and we will celebrate her birth like the gift that she is." Amina felt tears prick her eyes at his unwavering support. And celebrate they did. On the day of their daughter's birth, Idris named her Fatima, choosing a name rich with meaning and honor. He held his tiny daughter in his arms, marveling at her delicate features, her impossibly small fingers curling around his thumb. His heart swelled with pride, and he knew in that moment that he would do anything to protect her. Ignoring his mother's disapproval, he ordered sweets made from the finest ingredients and distributed them throughout the neighborhood. The aroma of pure ghee and cardamom filled the air as the treats were shared, a symbol of joy, of defiance against old traditions that saw daughters as burdens. Neighbors whispered. Some mocked. "Who celebrates the birth of a girl like this?" they asked. Idris's response was simple. "We do." Amina watched as he stood tall, unshaken by the opinions of others. In that moment, she loved him even more. Their daughter, their beautiful Fatima, would never grow up feeling unwanted. She would be cherished, celebrated, but not everyone shared their joy. Tahira's resentment deepened. She barely looked at the newborn, refused to hold her. Days turned into weeks, and while Amina basked in the warmth of motherhood, she couldn't ignore the undercurrents of tension. The house no longer felt like home. Every glance from Tahira was laced with disappointment, every interaction laced with passive aggression. Then a year later, the balance of the household shifted once more. A new bride entered the family. Idris's younger brother had married, and his wife, Safiya, was welcomed into the home with open arms. A few months after their marriage, the news came. Safiya was expecting. This time, when the ultrasound revealed it was a boy, the house erupted in celebration. Tahira beamed with pride, her laughter ringing through the halls. A grand feast was planned before the child had even arrived, and Amina watched from the sidelines, holding Fatima close. She felt the difference. Where her daughter's birth had been met with cold indifference, this unborn grandson was already being hailed as the family's greatest blessing. Fatima, too young to understand, toddled over to her grandmother, her tiny hands reaching up for affection. Tahira stepped back. Amina's stomach twisted. She clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around Fatima's small shoulders. Her daughter was too precious to be cast aside, too loved to be treated as anything less than the miracle she was. That night, Amina sat beside Idris, watching Fatima sleep. "Why does she hate her so much?" she whispered. Idris exhaled, rubbing his temples. "It's not Fatima she hates," he admitted. "It's what she represents." Amina swallowed hard. "And what's that?" "The breaking of tradition." Amina looked at her husband, her heart heavy with understanding. Fatima was more than just their daughter. She was a challenge to an outdated mindset, a living, breathing testament to change. And Amina vowed, then and there, that she would raise her daughter to know her worth, no matter what others believed. Because Fatima was not a burden. She was a blessing. And Amina would make sure the world knew it. The years passed, but the walls of the house remained unchanged, cold, unyielding, mirroring the heart of the woman who ruled within them. Fatima had grown into a bright-eyed child, full of laughter and curiosity, her tiny hands always reaching for something new to explore. But despite her innocence, she was never met with the warmth that other children received. Instead, she navigated a world where love was given in whispers and scorn was shouted in broad daylight. Amina watched it all unfold with a growing sense of helplessness. She had vowed to protect her daughter, to shield her from the very cruelty she had endured. But there were some battles that could not be fought with mere words. Tahira's disapproval had not lessened with time. If anything, it had hardened into something sharper, more relentless. She never raised a hand to Fatima, but the weight of her disdain was just as cutting. If the little girl sat too close to her newborn cousin, she was shooed away. If she laughed too loudly, she was hushed. If she simply existed in the wrong place at the wrong time, she was met with an icy glare that sent her scurrying back to her mother's embrace. She shouldn't be treated this way. Amina whispered to Idris one evening as they lay in the dim glow of their bedside lamp. Fatima had long since drifted off to sleep, her tiny form curled against her mother's side. Idris sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I know," he admitted, "but what can I do? She is my mother." Amina's lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to scream that being a mother didn't give someone the right to inflict pain. But she knew that Idris was trapped between loyalty and love. He had been raised to believe that questioning one's elders was akin to defying fate itself. And so Amina endured. She poured all her love into Fatima, ensuring that her daughter never went a day without feeling cherished. She read to her, sang lullabies in the quiet of the night, and traced gentle patterns into her palm whenever she was frightened. One day, as Amina sat beside Fatima, helping her sound out verses from the Quran, Safia, Idris's younger brother's wife, paused in the doorway, arms folded. "You teach her so she can make money reading for others, don't you?" she sneered. Amina's fingers tightened around the pages. "I teach her so she knows the words of Allah," she replied evenly, "so she carries faith in her heart." Safia scoffed. "And when she grows up, you'll send her to school and then what? Marry her off to someone poor? A girl like her won't bring anything good to this family." Amina inhaled deeply, suppressing the anger that burned in her chest. She had long since learned that arguing was pointless. Fatima, oblivious to the tension, smiled up at her mother. "Amma, will I finish the Quran soon?" Amina forced a smile and cupped her daughter's cheek. "Yes, my love. And when you do, we will celebrate just like we did on the day you were born." She meant it. No matter how many obstacles stood in their way, Fatima would always know her worth. But the cruelty of the household had begun to wear on the little girl. The rejection from her grandmother, the passive-aggressive comments from her aunt, it all left small, invisible scars. One night, as Amina tucked Fatima into bed, the child looked up with wide, troubled eyes. "Amma," she whispered, "why doesn't grandmother love me?" The question struck Amina like a blade. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, smoothing Fatima's hair. "Sometimes people don't know how to show love properly, but that doesn't mean you aren't loved." Fatima nodded slowly, but Amina could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. The final straw came on Fatima's 4th birthday. The little girl had spent days excitedly planning her special day, listing all the things she wanted: a small cake, a few balloons, just a simple moment of joy. Amina, eager to bring a spark of happiness into her daughter's world, baked a cake from scratch, decorating it with pink frosting and tiny sugar flowers. When the time came to celebrate, Fatima clapped her hands in excitement. "Amma, should we call grandmother and Auntie Safia?" Amina hesitated. She knew what the answer would be, but she couldn't bear to crush her daughter's innocent hope. Taking a deep breath, she walked to Tahira's room and knocked gently. "Amma, we're cutting Fatima's birthday cake. Would you like to join us?" Tahira didn't even look up from her knitting. "Why should I celebrate? She's just another mouth to feed." The words, spoken so casually, sent a chill down Amina's spine. She returned to Fatima with a forced smile. "It will be just us, my love." And so, in the quiet of their small room, with only the flickering candle as witness, Amina and Idris sang to their daughter, their voices filled with love, their hearts aching with the knowledge that the world outside this moment was far less kind. Fatima blew out her candles, her eyes filled with innocent joy. But Amina saw the slight slump in her shoulders, the way she glanced toward the door, hoping for someone who would never come. Later that night, as Amina lay awake, listening to the rhythmic breaths of her sleeping child, she made a silent vow. She would not let this house break Fatima. She would not let their indifference, their cruelty, shape her daughter's view of herself. Fatima would grow up knowing she was cherished. She would know that love was not measured by the approval of those who did not see her worth. And if this house could not give her that, then Amina would find a way to take her daughter somewhere that could. The morning of Fatima's 5th birthday arrived with the soft golden light of dawn filtering through the thin curtains of Amina's small room. The scent of cardamom tea mixed with the faint aroma of fresh dough, creating a warmth in the otherwise cold house. Amina had been awake long before sunrise, preparing for the small celebration she had promised her daughter. Fatima sat cross-legged on the floor, excitement lighting up her delicate features as she watched her mother knead the dough for sweet pastries. "Amma, will there be candles?" she asked, her voice full of innocent hope. Amina smiled, pressing a kiss to Fatima's forehead. "Of course, my love. There will be candles and you will make a wish." The little girl beamed, her dark eyes shining with anticipation. "And grandmother will come too?" Amina's hands faltered for just a second before she continued shaping the dough. She glanced toward the doorway where the rest of the household still slept, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that today was meant to be special for Fatima. "We will invite her," Amina said gently. Fatima clapped her hands, already imagining a room filled with laughter and love. She didn't yet understand the weight of unspoken resentment that hung in the house, didn't yet grasp the meaning behind her grandmother's cold stares. By noon, the small cake was baked, a simple vanilla cake with soft buttercream frosting. Amina had even managed to sew a tiny pink dress for Fatima, its fabric simple but carefully stitched with love. Idris had saved a few extra coins over the past months and brought home a small wrapped gift, a beautiful hairpin with delicate gold filigree. But as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, it became painfully clear that the rest of the family had no intention of celebrating. Amina knocked lightly on Tahira's door, heart-pounding. "Amma, we are cutting Fatima's birthday cake soon. She would love for you to join us." Tahira barely looked up from where she sat, her fingers busy with her knitting. "I have no interest in celebrating something that brings no honor to this family." Amina's throat tightened. "She's just a child, Amma." "She's a girl," Tahira corrected sharply. "And girls do not need celebrations. What are you teaching her, that she is something special?" Amina clenched her fists, willing herself to stay calm. "Because she is," she said softly. "She is our daughter, and she deserves love." Tahira scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Do what you want, but don't expect me to take part in this nonsense." Amina turned away, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had expected this, hoped against it, but expected it all the same. When she returned to the small living area where Fatima waited, she forced a bright smile onto her face. "It will just be us, my love." Fatima's smile faltered only for a second before she nodded. "That's okay, Amma. We'll have fun." And so, they did. Idris lit the single candle on the cake, and Fatima squeezed her eyes shut, making a wish before blowing it out. They clapped and laughed, making sure the small room was filled with warmth, even as the rest of the house remained cold. But later that night, when Fatima thought no one was watching, Amina saw her daughter sneak a glance toward her grandmother's closed door, the corners of her lips twitching downward. Amina's heart ached, but she remained silent. She would not let this night be ruined. Meanwhile, in the main hall of the house, Tahira was making different plans. She had already begun preparations for the upcoming birthday of Safia's son, her precious grandson. A proper celebration, a real celebration. There would be guests, a lavish feast, new clothes, and gifts fit for a boy who would carry on the family name. Amina overheard the plans the next morning as she passed by the kitchen, where the women whispered excitedly. "We'll have the finest dishes," Safia boasted, "and a professional photographer. Everyone will be there." Amina said nothing, merely tightened her grip on the tea tray she carried. That night, as she lay beside Idris, she finally voiced what had been weighing on her. "Did you hear them planning the birthday?" Idris exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "I did." Amina hesitated before whispering, "Why is it different for them? Why do they celebrate his birth but refuse to acknowledge hers?" Idris turned his head to face her, guilt evident in his expression. "Because he is a boy." Amina's eyes burned, though she refused to cry. "And that's enough reason?" "No," Idris admitted, "but it's the only reason they need." Amina looked over at their sleeping daughter, her tiny hands curled into fists as she dreamed. She vowed, then and there, that one day she would take Fatima away from this house. Away from the bitterness, the cruelty, the suffocating traditions that sought to dim her light. She would not let them win. Fatima would grow up knowing that she was loved, and Amina would make sure she never had to question it again. The night of the grand birthday celebration for Safia's son was filled with laughter, the scent of roasted lamb wafting through the air and the sound of clinking glasses. The house, usually so quiet and solemn, had transformed into a place of festivity, with colorful drapes, glowing lanterns, and trays of delicacies being carried around by busy hands. In contrast, Amina sat in her small room, away from the merriment, her fingers running through Fatima's silky hair as the little girl played with a tiny, worn-out doll. Fatima had barely spoken all day, her usual laughter absent. She had watched the house be decorated, the tables set with the finest cutlery, and the relatives arrive with expensive gifts, but no one had thought to invite her. "Amma," Fatima's voice was barely above a whisper. "Can I go outside for a little while?" Amina hesitated, her heart tightening. She wanted to protect her daughter from the cold glances, the unkind words, but she also knew that keeping her hidden was not the solution. "All right," she finally said, brushing a stray curl from Fatima's forehead. "But stay close to the house. Don't go too far." Fatima nodded eagerly and dashed out the door, her little feet barely making a sound on the cool stone floor. Amina remained in the room for a while, tidying up, but an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. The noise of the celebration continued, laughter echoing through the corridors. She stepped outside, glancing around, her eyes searching for the small figure of her daughter. Minutes passed, then an hour. Panic began to claw at Amina's throat. She rushed through the house, her voice tight with worry. "Has anyone seen Fatima?" No one answered. The guests were too busy enjoying the night, too wrapped up in the festivities to notice that a little girl had gone missing. Amina turned to Idris, who had just come inside from helping distribute food. "She's not here," she said, her voice shaking. "Fatima is missing." Idris's face paled. Without hesitation, he turned on his heel and ran toward the courtyard. Amina followed, her heart pounding against her ribs. The cold night air bit at her skin as they called out their daughter's name, their voices drowned out by the noise of the celebration. Then, from a distance, a scream shattered the air. Amina's blood ran cold. She didn't think, she ran, her feet flying over the uneven ground as she followed the sound. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she turned the corner, and there in the dim glow of a lantern, she saw her daughter. Fatima was curled on the ground, her tiny form trembling, her dress torn at the hem. Her face was streaked with tears, her beautiful dark eyes wide with terror. Amina dropped to her knees, gathering Fatima into her arms. "My love, what happened?" she choked out, brushing hair from the child's damp forehead. Fatima whimpered, clinging to her mother. "A man, he tried to take me," she whispered, barely audible. I ran, Amma." Amina's body went rigid. Rage, fear, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness crashed over her in waves. She turned to Idris, who was already scanning the area, his fists clenched. "Who was it?" he demanded, his voice raw with fury. Fatima only shook her head, burying her face into Amina's shoulder. By now, a small crowd had gathered, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. Sophia and Tahira stood at the edge, their expressions unreadable. "What is going on?" Tahira demanded. "Why are you causing a scene during the boys' celebration?" Amina turned, her eyes flashing with anger. "Fatima was attacked," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Someone tried to take her." Tahira sighed, shaking her head. "This is why I told you to keep her inside," she said dismissively. "Girls invite trouble. You should have watched her better." Amina's breath caught in her throat. "Are you saying this is her fault?" she whispered, disbelief laced in every syllable. Sophia folded her arms, glancing at the child with indifference. "It's best if we don't make a big deal out of this," she said coolly. "Do you want to bring shame upon this family?" Shame. Amina felt the word like a slap, as if the true shame wasn't in what had been done to her daughter, but in acknowledging it. Idris took a deep breath, his shoulders shaking with barely restrained fury. "We need to find out who did this," he said. "We need to call the authorities." Tahira stepped forward, her voice dangerously low. "You will do no such thing. Do you know what happens when these things go public? Do you know the whispers that will follow our family? This is a private matter." Amina's hands tightened around Fatima. "A man tried to hurt our daughter," she said through clenched teeth. "How can you stand there and talk about reputation?" Tahira's expression remained cold. "Because that is the way the world works. You cannot change it." Amina met her gaze, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. "Then I refuse to be part of this world," she said. Tahira's eyes narrowed, but Amina no longer cared. She had spent too long bending, too long obeying. This was the moment everything changed. Without another word, she turned and walked away, cradling Fatima against her chest, Idris at her side. The night had been meant for celebration, But as Amina stepped through the threshold of her home, she knew one thing with certainty. She would never let her daughter grow up in a house that valued silence over justice. Amina sat in the cold hospital waiting room, her arms wrapped tightly around Fatima, who lay motionless in her lap. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting a harsh glow on the white walls. The beeping of heart monitors and the hurried footsteps of doctors filled the air, yet all Amina could hear was the ragged breathing of her daughter. Idris paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. He had always been a man of quiet strength, but now his entire being trembled with barely restrained rage and helplessness. "Where is the doctor?" he muttered under his breath, his voice cracking. "Why hasn't anyone come yet?" Amina pressed her lips to Fatima's forehead, feeling the dampness of her child's sweat. "She's burning up," she whispered. "Idris, we need to do something." As if on cue, a nurse appeared at the doorway. "Mr. and Mrs. Idris?" she called, scanning the room. Idris rushed to her. "Yes, please, my daughter. She was attacked. She needs help." The nurse's expression softened. "The doctor's preparing a room. We'll take her in now." She signaled for 2 orderlies who arrived with a stretcher. Amina hesitated for a brief moment before gently placing Fatima onto it, her tiny fingers slipping away from her mother's grasp. As the orderlies wheeled Fatima away, Amina felt her legs give out beneath her. Idris caught her just in time, his grip firm but trembling. "She's strong?" he whispered. "She'll be okay." Amina could only nod, too choked up to speak. Minutes turned into an hour. Then 2. Amina and Idris sat in silence, waiting, each second stretching into eternity. The cold metal chairs offered no comfort, but neither of them cared. Amina prayed silently, her lips moving in whispered supplications, her hands clutching the edge of her shawl so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Finally, the doctor emerged from the emergency ward, his expression unreadable. Amina and Idris jumped to their feet, searching his face for any sign of hope. "The good news," the doctor said slowly, "is that she's alive." Amina exhaled sharply, tears welling in her eyes. "And the bad news?" The doctor hesitated. "She was severely traumatized. Her body shut down from the shock. We nearly lost her, but miraculously, her vitals stabilized. She's unconscious, but we expect her to wake up in the next 24 hours. A sob broke free from Amina's lips, and Idris pulled her into his arms. Relief flooded through them, but it was laced with fear. "Can we see her?" Idris asked hoarsely. The doctor nodded. "She's being transferred to a private room. You can see her shortly, but be gentle. She's been through a lot." Amina and Idris followed the nurse down a quiet hallway, their hearts pounding. When they stepped into the room, Amina let out a quiet gasp. Fatima lay on a hospital bed, her small frame wrapped in a white blanket. An IV was attached to her tiny arm, her face pale but peaceful. Amina rushed to her side, stroking her daughter's cheek. "My baby," she whispered. "Mama is here." Idris sat beside them, his large hand covering Fatima's small one. "We're not leaving you," he murmured. "Not ever." The night passed in a haze of whispered prayers and anxious waiting. Amina dozed off at some point, her head resting on the side of Fatima's bed, while Idris sat upright, watching over them like a silent guardian. Then, just before dawn, a soft voice broke the stillness. "Amma?" Amina's eyes shot open. She sat up so fast that the chair scraped against the floor. "Fatima!" Fatima's eyes fluttered open, her lashes damp. She looked weak, but she was awake. Amina cupped her daughter's face, pressing trembling kisses to her forehead. "Oh, my love, you're awake. Alhamdulillah." Idris exhaled, relief washing over his features. "You scared us, little one." Fatima's lips trembled. I was so scared." Tears spilled down Amina's cheeks. "I know, my love, but you're safe now. No one will ever hurt you again." Fatima looked at her father, then back at her mother. "Promise?" Idris bent down, kissing her forehead. "I swear it." The sun began to rise outside the hospital window, casting a golden glow over the room. It was a new day, and though scars remained, so did hope. Amina knew their fight wasn't over, but for now she held her daughter close, grateful for this one miracle. They had survived. The air in the house felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken words and silent judgments. After Fatima's ordeal, Idris and Amina had grown distant from the family, retreating into their own world, where only their daughter's well-being mattered. They spent more time together, shielding Fatima from the cruel whispers that still lingered within the walls of the home. Tahira, however, remained unchanged, She carried herself with the same rigid authority, her voice sharp, her presence looming like a shadow over the household. She never once visited Fatima in the hospital, never asked how she was recovering. If anything, she seemed irritated that the incident had disrupted the normal rhythm of the house. One afternoon, as Amina was preparing tea in the kitchen, she overheard a hushed conversation between Sophia and one of the visiting relatives. "It's strange, isn't it?" the woman murmured. "Ever since that child came back, bad luck has been following this house." Sophia clicked her tongue. "You know how these things are. When a girl brings shame, it lingers." Amina's grip tightened around the handle of the teapot, her knuckles turning white. The heat from the stove burned against her skin, but she barely noticed. Her pulse pounded in her ears as anger surged through her veins. How dare they? How dare they blame her innocent child for what had happened? That night, as she lay beside Idris, she whispered, "I can't stay here anymore." Idris turned to her, his face unreadable in the dim light. "I know," he admitted after a long pause. "I feel it too. But leaving wasn't simple. This was their home, the only place they had ever known. They had no wealth, no safety net, nowhere to go. And yet, Amina knew that if they stayed, Fatima would never be free. She would always carry the weight of their disdain, always be seen as a burden rather than the blessing she was. Fate, however, had its own way of making decisions. A week later, news arrived that Tahira had gone to visit her sister in another city. It should have been a simple journey, just a few hours away. But that evening, as the family sat down for dinner, a messenger arrived at the door, his face pale, his voice trembling. "There's been an accident." Silence fell over the table. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy and foreboding. Idris stood abruptly. "What do you mean?" The messenger swallowed hard. "The car she was in, there was a collision on the highway. She didn't make it." The sound of Safia's spoon clattering onto the plate was the only noise that followed. Amina felt a strange stillness settle over her. She should have felt something, grief, relief, fear, but all she felt was emptiness. The funeral was held the next day. The house filled with mourners, voices weaving in and out of prayers and whispered condolences. Amina watched from the corner, Fatima clutching her hand tightly. The little girl didn't understand the weight of what had happened, only that the grandmother who had never loved her was now gone. Idris, for his part, remained stoic. He did what was expected, stood by the guests, accepted their condolences, but there was no true sorrow in his eyes. He had long since mourned the mother he wished he had. That night, when the house had emptied and the last prayers had been spoken, Amina and Idris sat together, the silence between them louder than words. "What now?" Amina finally asked. Idris exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face. "We leave." Amina's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" He turned to her, his expression resolute. "She's gone. The only reason we stayed was because of her. Now there's nothing left tying us here." For the first time in years, hope flickered in Amina's chest. She looked down at Fatima, who was curled up beside her, her tiny fingers wrapped around her mother's wrist. "We'll go somewhere new." Idris continued. "Somewhere no one knows us. Somewhere Fatima can grow up without being haunted by this place." Tears welled in Amina's eyes, not from sadness but from relief. "Then let's go." That night, for the first time in a long time, Amina slept peacefully, knowing that when she woke, a new chapter would begin. The dawn of a new day carried an air of bittersweet liberation for Amina and Idris. The house that had once been filled with whispers and unspoken resentment now stood eerily quiet in Tahira's absence. For years, its walls had absorbed sorrow, anger, and silent prayers. But now, they would leave it behind. Amina moved through the house methodically, packing what little they owned. Each item she placed into their modest travel bags was a memory, some painful, some precious. She smoothed out Fatima's small dresses, folded Idris's neatly pressed shirts, and finally wrapped her prayer mat with delicate care. Fatima, now fully recovered but still fragile in spirit, sat on the edge of the bed watching her mother. "Where are we going, Amma?" she asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Amina knelt before her daughter, cupping her tiny hands. "Somewhere new, my love. Somewhere safe. A place where you can grow up happy." Fatima nodded, though confusion still clouded her young eyes. She glanced around the room, as if memorizing every detail. This was the only home she had ever known, despite its cruelty. Idris entered, his posture firm yet weary. "The cart is ready," he announced, glancing at the sparse belongings they were taking with them. His eyes met Amina's, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. This was the right decision. As they stepped out of the house, a few neighbors gathered, their expressions mixed with curiosity and quiet judgment. Some whispered among themselves, speculating about what would become of them. Others merely watched, their faces unreadable. Sophia approached, her arms folded across her chest. "So you're really leaving?" she said, her tone unreadable. Idris nodded. "Yes," she exhaled sharply. "Where will you go?" Amina tightened her grip on Fatima's hand. "Somewhere we're wanted." Sophia scoffed, but there was no real malice behind it. Perhaps even she knew that this house had never been a home to them. "Good luck," she muttered, before turning and walking away. The journey was long and arduous. They traveled by cart through winding roads, the wheels creaking beneath the weight of their past. Fatima sat between her parents, her small fingers grasping Amina's as she took in the world beyond the walls of her grandmother's house. The first night, they stopped in a small village to rest. Idris found an old acquaintance, a man named Rafiq, who welcomed them into his modest home. He was kind, his wife even kinder, and they provided warm food and a place to sleep. It was the first time in years that Amina had felt true hospitality. Over a simple meal of lentils and flatbread, Rafiq leaned back, observing Idris. "So, what now?" he asked. "Where will you settle?" Idris exchanged a glance with Amina before answering. "Somewhere far from here. I want to find work, build something new for my family." Rafiq nodded. "There's a town a day's journey from here. Not too big, not too small. Plenty of work for a man like you." Hope flickered in Idris's eyes. "Thank you, my friend." That night, as they lay on thin mattresses in the guest quarters, Amina watched Fatima sleep peacefully. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of fear pressing against her chest. "We're going to be okay," Idris murmured beside her. Amina turned to him, the hint of a smile on her lips. "Yes, we are." The next morning, they set off again, the rising sun casting golden hues over the horizon. With each mile they traveled, the grip of the past loosened. A new chapter awaited them, one filled with the promise of hope, of healing, and most importantly, of love. The town they arrived in was unlike anything Amina had ever known. It was modest but lively, with streets lined with small shops and bustling with people who greeted each other with warmth. The scent of freshly baked bread mixed with the crisp morning air as merchants set up their stalls, and children ran through the alleyways, their laughter echoing off stone walls. For the first time in years, Amina felt something close to peace. Idris found work almost immediately at a carpenter's shop, thanks to Rafiq's recommendation. The owner, an elderly man named Yusuf, took an instant liking to him. "A strong man with good hands," Yusuf had said, slapping Idris on the back. "You'll do well here." Amina, too, found her place in the new town. The local women welcomed her into their community, sharing food, stories, and advice. She quickly became known for her kindness and skill in sewing, which led to small jobs that helped them earn extra money. The home they rented was small, but cozy, with a courtyard where Fatima could play freely without fear of scornful glances or harsh words. Fatima flourished in this new environment. She made friends, something she had never truly experienced before. Her laughter became a familiar sound in their home, a melody that Amina cherished more than anything. She also continued her Quranic studies under a kind-hearted teacher who praised her intelligence and dedication. One evening, as Amina was folding clothes, Fatima ran inside, her face glowing with excitement. "Amma, the school teacher said I can start regular school next week." Amina paused, her heart swelling with pride. "Really?" Fatima nodded eagerly. "Yes, I can learn reading, writing, and even numbers." Tears pricked Amina's eyes. This was what she had always wanted, for Fatima to have choices, to have a future unshackled by outdated beliefs. The days turned into weeks, and soon months had passed. Amina's confidence grew with each passing day. She no longer walked with her head bowed in submission. She stood tall, knowing she had survived, knowing she had carved out a better life for her daughter. One afternoon, as she sat in the marketplace selling handmade garments, a woman approached her stall. "You made these?" the woman asked, running her fingers over the delicate embroidery. "Yes," Amina replied. The woman smiled. "They're beautiful. Would you be interested in working for my boutique?" Amina blinked in surprise. "Me? You have talent," the woman said simply, "and I need skilled hands. Think about it." That night, as she told Idris about the offer, he grinned. "You see, I always knew you were meant for more." Amina looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized how far they had come. The timid girl who had entered his home years ago was gone. In her place stood a woman who had fought, endured, and risen stronger than before. Months later, Amina gave birth to another child, a baby girl. Unlike before, there was no fear, no disappointment, no shame. Instead, there was joy. And once again, she and Idris distributed sweets throughout the town, celebrating loudly and proudly. Amina stood at their doorstep, watching as Fatima held her baby sister with gentle hands, whispering promises of love and protection. Amina knew then that she had done right by her daughter. She had broken the cycle. She had given Fatima a life filled with love, not fear. And in doing so, she had set herself free. A new beginning, a new life, a future filled with endless possibilities. Amina smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, knowing deep in her heart that this was only the beginning of something truly beautiful. Thanks for watching. If you love this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more great stories like this one. Tell us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share this video with your friends and family so they can enjoy it too. There's plenty more amazing stories waiting for you. So stick around and keep exploring. See you in the next videos.